This is a relatively straightforward part of the specification that students get often mixed up with, and you can see lots of specification objectives, but it's just these three that we're looking at in this presentation, but it does feed into the area on the balance of payments and the current account, so it is an important part of the specification, even though it's small. So looking at exchange rates, and exchange rates are simply the price of one currency in terms of another. So I'm using old data here, but in January 2013, £1 bought $1.64. So if we look at different situations, probably when you're looking at exchange rates, it's from your own experience of going on holiday. So imagine you've saved up £200 to go abroad, maybe with your friends or with your family, and you're thinking about how much spending money that's going to give you. Well, at different exchange rates, it gives you different amounts of spending money. So you know, you saved up the same amount in each scenario, but what you would actually want is the pound to be quite strong, as in the pound buys a lot of another currency, because that would give you €300, and obviously that would enable you to buy more than you'd be able to buy with €100 or €200. But if we look at it from the other point of view, and we look at maybe someone from abroad coming over to the UK, and it's a very stereotypical name. It was actually the name of my hamster. I was thinking Pedro, but imagine Pedro saved up €300, and he's coming over to the UK to spend his money, and he wants as much money as he can that he can get with his money, and this is what it would come out as. And obviously he wants £600, so he wants the pound to be quite weak against the euro, or put another way, he wants the euro to be quite strong against the pound, so that he has as much as he can spend in the UK. But we also have to think about it from businesses' points of views. So if we imagine, I'm from Lancashire, so that's why I've used the example of Lancashire hot pots. If we imagine a company who are selling hot pots, and they don't particularly care about what price they charge abroad, as long as it's attractive to customers. But what they care about is when you transfer it into the UK currency, that you get £1.50, because that covers all the costs and they make a good margin if they charge that price. So at these different exchange rates, this is what they'd have to charge for hot pots. Now obviously they're going to want to have this exchange rate, because this makes their product seem really cheap in the international market. So as demand is downward sloping, you get lots of demand for your product. And if the exchange rate moved up, they'd either have to charge a higher price and maybe get less demand, or they'd have to maybe charge the same price, but when you transfer the money back into pounds, it wouldn't be £1.50, it'd be a lot less than you're getting if you kept the price at, say, €1 or €1.50. So they'd have to take a hit on their profit margins. But if you so that's an exporter then. We'll look at the exact definitions of what an exporter is in a few slides on. But if you look at the case of an importer, say you've got, an electronics company that sells iPads, and then they need to import these iPads from America. And we've got, they go onto an American website and it's all in dollars. This is the price of them at different exchange rates, and obviously they want the pound to be quite strong in that situation, because it costs them less to import the product. So it's not a straight solution story really, because we've got some businesses that export the products that want a weak exchange rate, and some people who import your products who want a strong exchange rate. So let's have a look at what this means. Firstly, though, this is a nice 3-mark question that you often get on the exam, and it's describe how or use a diagram to show how exchange rates are determined, and it's actually one of the only micro diagrams that you draw in a macro exam, because the exchange rates or the market for foreign currency, that's a specific market, so it's not macroeconomics, it's looking at a specific market, so therefore it's a micro diagram. So we've got price, and we've got quantity, and we've got supply, and we've got demand, not aggregate demand, aggregate supply, price level and real GDP. So just be careful on that, and here's how exchange rates are determined. And just like microeconomics, if demand increases for a currency, the price of the currency increases, and this is what we call appreciates. in value. It's just a word that we use to mean that the price of the currency increases. And if supply decreases of a currency, it appreciates. But if demand for a currency falls, we get a depreciation in your value. And if supply increases of a currency, we get depreciation in the value as well. So lots of different things can happen, and we'll go into some details about why appreciation and depreciation can happen, and then the consequences you might have on your economy. So this comes from these pages in the textbooks 133 to 135. But what determines the demands and supply of the currency? It can be quite complicated, so I usually tend to get my students just to focus on what determines the demand for a currency, and we do a little bit on supply. So that's you can do that if you want. But here we go. We have, and I'm going to go into much more detail about this, interest rates. If you have an increase in the interest rates, it pushes the price of the currency up, so it causes appreciation, and I've got a whole slide later on about why this happens in more detail. If you decrease the interest rate in a country, you get depreciation. So they move in the same way, broadly speaking. Increase in interest rate, increase in the exchange rate, so appreciation, decrease in interest rate, depreciation. International competitiveness will determine the demand for your currency. If you are very internationally competitive, as in if your products are very well made, very good quality, if they're priced competitively, so we mean that they're maybe a little bit cheaper than the competitors, you'll get an increase in demand for the currency because people want to buy your products. To buy your products, they need your currency. So increase in demand, it causes appreciation. Maybe you have a change in income abroad, so the economy abroad is doing really well, you've got lots of growth. Then the people in that country would be buying more of all types of products, and that would include our exports as well. And to buy our exports, they need our currency, so you get an increase in the demand for the pound, so appreciation. If there's a change in income at home, so for example, say we have a very big period of growth in our economy, again, we'd be buying more of all types of products, and that might mean that we want more imports as well as our domestically produced products. And to buy imports, we need foreign currency, but to buy foreign currency, we need to supply our pounds, and if we increase the supply of pounds, we get depreciation. And speculators as well can cause movement in the exchange rates. So if people think that a currency is going to fall in value, they will sell their currency, and that increases the supply, and so puts downwards pressure on the price. And if they think that the price of currency is going to increase, they will demand more of that currency, and therefore they will increase the price. So it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. Okay, so just definitions of importers and exporters. Importers are businesses that bring materials or products from outside the country, in this case the UK, into the country. And an exporter is a business that sells their products outside the UK, so they're shipping their products to foreign countries. So let's go back to what we looked at on one of the first few slides. So if we have appreciation, this means that imports become cheaper to buy. So we obviously like that if we're importers. So if we think about a florist, most flowers are not grown in the UK, I'm afraid. We don't have the climate for them really. Maybe daffodils, but not other exotic types of flowers. So if we have appreciation, they love it, because they can buy their flowers. Their flowers now appear to be cheaper when they're importing the products. But exporters, people are exporting the products, maybe we're exporting our daffodils abroad, they become relatively more expensive to buy when we export them. So demand for them might kind of fall. So we don't like appreciation if we're an exporter. Whereas if we're an importer and we have depreciation, imports become more expensive to buy and exports become cheaper. So obviously the exporters like depreciation of a currency because it means their prices of their exports appear cheaper, and so demand for their exports should increase, whereas importers prefer appreciation. of their currency. And that's quite a lot to take in. But if you remember the word spiced, I got this from Tutor to You actually, so I should attribute it to them. But strong pound, imports cheap, exports dear. Dear is just another word for expensive. So appreciation, so strong pounds, is importers like it, exporters don't. So, what are interest rates? Interest rate is the charge for borrowing money, or the amount paid for the reward for lending money, basically. And the Bank of England set interest rates. But if you want to know more about that, look at the presentation on monetary policy. And so I promised that I was going to go through why does an increase in the interest rate cause appreciation? Why does a decrease in the interest rate cause depreciation? Well, an increase in the interest rate means that savers, anyone who has money in a UK bank account, gets a larger reward for their saving. Okay, so we have, an international economy where if you want, you can have a foreign bank account, and so foreign people, maybe investors, think, UK bank accounts can get a good return on that. So money will flow into the UK to take advantage of the higher interest rates. And this money that we call it, because it's kind of the short-term kind of flows of money, we call it hot money. So hot money flows into the UK, and to put money in the UK bank account, you need pounds. So the demand for the currency in the UK increases. So we know when demand increases, it causes appreciation. Whereas if the interest rate decreases, maybe people in the UK might start to look at other countries' bank accounts and think they've got a better rate. Or maybe even those foreign investors that initially invested in the UK might think, I'm going to move my money around now because other countries give a better rate of reward from holding my money in their bank accounts. So hot money would flow out of the UK, and they need to change their money into a different currency wherever they want to put it in their bank account. So the supply of pounds increases as people are supplying pounds to change into other currencies, and therefore you get depreciation. So that's just an explanation of how that happens and why that happens. Okay, so looks really, really complicated, this. I probably should have broken it down into a few slides, but a few years ago there was a question on how does an exchange rate affect the macroeconomy, and it was an essay question. So we really need to be thinking about the consequences of changes in the exchange rate and appreciation and depreciation. So how does it affect economic growth? Well, broadly speaking, although there's lots of dependent upon factors, it would reduce economic growth and appreciation of the exchange rate, and that's because demand for imports would increase and exports would decrease because imports would appear cheaper, exports would appear more expensive, and that should reduce aggregate demand, which reduces real GDP. Exchange rate depreciation, though, should increase aggregate demand because demand for imports would decrease and exports would increase because of the changes in their prices. In terms of inflation, imports, when we have an exchange rate depreciation, because imports get more expensive, that it's actually called imported inflation. So that would cause some cost push inflation, maybe, and it could cause some demand pull inflation as well, because we're selling more exports. AD would increase. Your imported inflation would be relatively short term, though, so that could be a nice evaluation factor you talk about. We have had that in the last few years as well, a bit of imported inflation, but they always say, these economists at the Bank of England, it's not too much to worry about because it'll work its way through the economy eventually. But in terms of an exchange rate appreciation, imports should become cheaper, demand for exports falls. So you may get on your diagram, it might show deflation happening, but it's more likely to be disinflation that you get, so a reduction in the rate of inflation. The effect on unemployment, exchange rate appreciation would, we know that it reduces AD, so it should decrease, I can see here I've made a little bit of a mistake. I'm looking at, when I look at disinflation decreases. Okay, so here we go. So demand for exports decreases, so therefore labourers derive demand, so therefore the demand for workers would decrease as well. Whereas an exchange rate depreciation, we know that aggregate demand is increasing, so demand for exports, well, the increase is due to the increase in the demand for exports, so demand for workers to produce those exports would also increase. So unemployment would reduce when exchange rates depreciate, unemployment would increase probably when the exchange rate appreciates. And in terms of the balance payments, which is contained within another presentation, when the exchange rate appreciates, usually you get a deterioration in the balance payments because demand falls for exports and imports increase. We're looking at the current account here, or the trade account, and it should improve when we have an exchange rate depreciation. But we did have an exchange rate depreciation, quite a significant one, 5-6 years ago, when the interest rate was dropped from 5% to 0.5%. And that's why suddenly it got a lot more expensive to go on holiday for people that live in the UK. But it didn't really improve our current account significantly enough. But that's all in the balance of payments presentation, why that kind of thing can happen. And that's a bit of A2 coming in there as well, like the J-curve effect and the Marshall-Lerner condition as well. All fun stuff to look forward to. But just what I'm saying is all of these things, yeah, generally this is what would happen, but there's always a little bit of a depends upon. So those are our exchange rate. Oh, there we go. We've completed them all. Exchange rate specification. So how are exchange rates determined? By demand and supply? Well, they're determined by demand and supply. Recognise that a fall in the exchange rate will lower export prices and raise import prices and aggregate demand and vice versa. And explain how changes in the exchange rate may affect the macro economy, which was all that stuff there.